In the year of our era, the city of Constantinople stood as the very heart of the known world, a shining beacon of imperial power and spiritual grandeur. Its skyline was dominated by golden domes of splendid temples that dazzled under the cold winter sun, their reflections shimmering across the dark, chilly waters of the Bosphorus. Daily life in this mighty metropolis followed an unyielding, often tense rhythm. Traders, speaking loudly, proclaimed prices on the bustling forum, their voices echoing amid the clatter of commerce. Legionnaires, clad in polished armour that gleamed brilliantly, patrolled the city walls of Byzantium, ensuring the safety of the empire's most vital stronghold. Meanwhile, in countless churches and monasteries, prayers rose incessantly, pleas for salvation, for the preservation of the empire's divine order. Yet beneath this outward veneer of calm and order, a storm was quietly brewing within the core of the Roman Empire's eastern stronghold. The very atmosphere was charged, filled with whispers of ominous prophecies, rumours of divine displeasure, and mounting fears. For several years now, nature had seemed to turn against the Romans. Earthquakes rattled Greece with relentless fury, shaking its very foundations and unsettling the land. From the depths of the Aegean Sea, with a deafening roar of water and ash, rose a new volcanic island, as if the earth itself was crying out in pain. For many, these formidable phenomena signalled a divine warning, a visible sign of God's wrath, a call to repentance for some grievous sin that had soiled the holy faith. On one particularly cold, bleak day, a gathering formed on the main square of Augustaium, right before the grand entrance to the imperial palace at the gates of Chalca. The crowd gazed upward, their eyes fixed on a monumental icon of Christ the Saviour, an ancient image that had watched over generations of emperors and citizens for centuries. But today, their purpose was not prayer. Under the orders of Emperor Leo II and his trusted guardian, Savor, the city's defender from the Arab threat, a detachment of the Imperial Guard had arrived. One of their officers, named Safar, was carefully placing a long ladder against the wall. His mission was clear, yet harrowing. His goal was to destroy the sacred icon. Clutching an axe in his hand, he began to ascend the unstable steps, ready to carry out his destructive task. Suddenly, the crowd erupted into a furious cry of protest. Their outcry was not merely a display of anger, it was a sacred outrage, witnessing an act of blasphemy committed before their very eyes. A group of women, their faces contorted with rage and holy fervour, rushed toward the ladder like a wave of righteous wrath. They clutched at the wooden structure, pulling and shaking it violently in a desperate attempt to save the sacred image. The officer, overwhelmed, lost his balance and tumbled onto the marble paving beneath, crying out in pain. But the crowd, maddened and unrestrained, descended upon him with savage fury, beating him to death, an act of collective vengeance, a tragic turning point. Neither the frenzied women nor even the emperor, who had issued the deadly order, fully understood what they had unwittingly unleashed that day at these gates. They had ignited a civil war, one that would last not for a year or 10, but for more than a century. A war that would cleave the society, divide the armies, and threaten the very soul of the church itself. It was a conflict in which fathers would turn against their sons, neighbours would betray neighbours, and accusations would fly over acts of devotion or heresy. The war would involve torture, exile, and executions, but not necessarily for traditional crimes like treason or heresy, as understood in conventional terms. Instead, the punishments would be meted out based on beliefs about sacred images and their veneration or destruction. This was a war fought over icons, a a cultural and spiritual battleground, and it nearly brought the Byzantine Empire to its knees. To grasp the full depth and tragic scope of the abyss that opened within Byzantine society in the 7th century, we must first delve into the world that the iconoclasts, those who aimed to destroy sacred images, wanted to erase. We need to understand what icons truly represented to the Byzantines. An icon was not merely a work of art or a decorative element within a church, nor was it solely a visual aid for the illiterate to learn religious stories. It was something far greater, an essential conduit to the divine. An icon was a sacred window into the spiritual realm, a point of contact bridging earth and heaven. It served as a visible testimony to the invisible presence of God, the Virgin Mary, and saints. These images were venerated as more than mere paintings. They embodied the living realities of divine presence. The veneration of sacred images in Christianity evolved gradually over centuries. The early church, which emerged from its Jewish roots, was initially cautious about the use of religious images. The Jewish tradition, with its strict prohibition against graven images, imparted a cautious attitude. Early Christians feared that embracing icons too enthusiastically might lead to the sin of idolatry, worshipping images instead of the divine itself, which was considered both a heresy and a grave spiritual danger. Despite these reservations, the use of icons gradually grew in importance, becoming central to the Byzantine spiritual life and theological understanding. The act of venerating images was not seen as idol worship, but as a means of honouring the sacred and drawing closer to the divine mystery through visible representations. The earliest Christian imagery, discovered within the labyrinths of underground catacombs, was characterized by its deeply symbolic nature. These initial representations, often modest and simplified, served as visual expressions of faith intended to convey spiritual truths in a manner accessible to believers who could not read or interpret complex theological texts. Among the most common symbols were the fish, which represented Christ through the Greek word ichthys, signifying Jesus as the Saviour, the anchor, symbolizing hope and steadfastness amidst adversity, and the dove, embodying the Holy Spirit's gentle presence and divine guidance. As time progressed and Christianity transitioned from a persecuted minority faith to the official religion of the Roman Empire, the ways in which believers expressed their devotion through visual art underwent a profound transformation. During the later centuries, particularly from the 6th to the 7th, the veneration of icons became an integral, widespread, and deeply rooted part of Byzantine Christian life and theology. These religious images appeared everywhere, whether in majestic basilicas like Hagia Sophia, or in humble village chapels, in the throne room of the imperial palace, or in simple, humble cottages of peasants. They adorned military banners, carried into battle by legions or small portable icons, known as encolpia, which served as personal protective talismans worn on the chest. Behind these icons, devout believers would light lamps and candles, incense their images with fragrant myrrh, and often kiss them reverently. Worshippers bowed down before them in complete humility, attributing miraculous powers to their presence. It was widely believed that icons possessed a divine efficacy. They could heal illnesses, ward off enemies, and protect communities from natural disasters. Special reverence was paid to what were known as acharopita icons, or not made by hands images, which according to tradition had appeared without human intervention, created directly by the divine hand of God himself. The most famous among these was the Mandilion, or the image of the Saviour not made by human hands, which bore the visage of Christ and was kept in the city of Edessa. This sacred relic was considered the most potent form of divine protection. an almighty shield that defended the city from invaders. Another notable sacred image was the Virgin Hodegetria, meaning the guide, which was believed to have been painted by the evangelist Luke himself in Constantinople. According to legend, during sieges, this icon was paraded in a religious procession around the city walls, with the faithful trusting that it invoked the protective presence of the Virgin Mary herself over the capital. Such acts of veneration were not merely superstitions, but embodied a profound theological doctrine, the doctrine of incarnation. Christianity teaches that the invisible and incomprehensible God became human in the person of Jesus Christ. As a result, divine truth could be presented visibly and tangibly. When portraying Christ, the artist was not simply depicting divine nature, but was revealing his human form, thus bearing witness to the reality of the incarnation. In this context, the icon was more than a religious image. It became a visual dogma, a theological affirmation of the truth of Christianity, and a safeguard against heresies that denied Christ's human nature. The veneration of icons was intricately linked with the cult of saints and their relics. The saints represented on icons were not viewed as mere historical figures, but as living beings who, although residing in heaven, remained spiritually present and accessible through their images. Prayer before an icon was understood as a direct appeal to the saints depicted, who acted as an intercessor and mediator between the believer and God. Monasteries that possessed miraculous icons or relics of revered saints, such as Saint Demetrius of Thessaloniki or Saint Nicholas of Myra, became major pilgrimage centres. These spiritual hubs accumulated vast wealth and wielded significant influence, attracting countless pilgrims seeking healing, divine intervention, and spiritual blessing. However, amidst this widespread love and veneration, a certain problematic aspect also emerged. For many lay people, especially those lacking formal education or theological training, the line between reverent veneration of an image, a practice called proskynesis, and the worship of the image as an idol, known as latria, became increasingly blurred. While the Church warned against idol worship, for some believers, the distinction between honouring the icon as a holy window to the divine and venerating it as an idolatrous object began to fade, leading to debates and controversies that would eventually culminate in significant theological disputes during the iconoclastic controversies. In conclusion, Christian icons evolved from humble symbols in underground catacombs into magnificent, revered images symbolizing core doctrines of faith and divine presence. Their proliferation across sacred spaces of all kinds reflected not only religious devotion, but also deep theological principles rooted in the mystery of Christ's incarnation, serving both as expressions of worship and as powerful tools for spiritual education and communal identity. Historical records often recount the most extreme expressions of superstitious devotion, revealing how deeply entrenched some folk practices became over centuries. Among these, there are stories of people scraping off paint from icons, deliberately removing paint layers in a misguided attempt at religious meaning. Others would incorporate fragments of icons into their wine during communion rites, believing this would somehow imbue the sacrament with special power. There were also those who took icons as godparents for their children, seeking divine protection and favour through this sacred bond. Some devotees even used icons as magical talismans or amulets, believing they could ward off evil or bring good fortune. Such extreme manifestations of popular piety, what was often called folk orthodox Christianity, bordered on pagan superstition, blurring the lines between genuine faith and superstition. These practices caused great concern among the educated clergy and intellectual circles, who saw in them a perversion of true religious devotion. For them, such distortions threatened to undermine the authentic teachings of the Church and risked leading people back toward idolatry, a spiritual error the Church had strenuously fought for centuries. By the beginning of the 7th century, the Byzantine Empire found itself in a state of continual crisis. The so-called 20-year period of anarchy, stretching from 695 to 717, was marked by relentless palace coups and rapid shifts of imperial power. During these turbulent decades, 7 different emperors seized the throne, plunging the empire into chaos and political instability. This internal turmoil weakened the empire's defences and left its borders vulnerable to external enemies. The most formidable threat at the time was the Arab Caliphate, a rapidly expanding Islamic empire that, inspired by a new and revolutionary religious doctrine, sought to convert or conquer vast territories. Over the course of just a century, Arab forces captured regions that once belonged to the Eastern Roman world, including Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and much of North Africa. Islam, at its core, was a strictly aniconic religion, which mandated the avoidance of images or representations of living beings in religious contexts. Its followers regarded the veneration of icons, images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and saints, as forms of idol worship, which they condemned with disdain. From the perspective of Muslim doctrine, venerating icons was not only misguided, but also tantamount to idolatry, an offence to the one God worshipped in Islam. In the borderlands of Asia Minor, where Byzantine influence and Arab expansion continually intersected, these doctrinal differences did not go unnoticed. Some Byzantine military leaders and bishops from the eastern provinces began to question whether the veneration of icons might be provoking divine displeasure. Could the persistent military defeats and calamities be signs that God had turned his face away from the Christian empire? Was it possible that the pagan-like worship of images was causing his wrath, while the Muslims, who worshipped only the one God without any images, received his favour and victory? By the time Leo II and Sabrus ascended to the imperial throne in the year 717, Byzantine society resembled a powder keg ready to ignite. On one hand, the population's collective faith in the miraculous power of icons formed the spiritual backbone of the empire, supporting the entire religious and cultural life of the people. On the other hand, there were growing concerns among theologians, monks, and educated elites about the superstitious excesses that characterized some popular practices. These doubts and anxieties were compounded by continuous external pressures from the Islamic world, which increased ideological and political tensions. The slightest spark was enough to ignite a full-blown crisis. That spark was provided by an emperor's soldier, resolute, determined, and firmly convinced of the righteousness of his cause, who emerged from the eastern frontiers of the empire. While Constantinople was languishing in chaos and political instability, this man was forging his character amidst the hardships of a relentless war with the Arab armies. His name was Conan, and he was not born into privilege or nobility. Instead, he was the son of a humble peasant, either from the region of Isauria or, according to a more probable account, from the Syrian city of Hermanaia, known today as Kahramanmaraş. This land was a melting pot of peoples and cultures, a crucible where Greeks, Armenians, and Syrians lived side by side, sharing their struggles and hopes. It was precisely in this frontier zone, on the very edge of the empire's border, that Conan learned resilience and the art of survival amid perpetual conflict. Here, the empire's defences were constantly tested, and the people living in this zone bore the brunt of the ongoing war against the expansionist Muslim forces. This background shaped Conon into a leader of extraordinary resolve, one who would not only strive to save Byzantium from imminent collapse, but also confront a deep and divisive religious schism threatening to tear the legacy of Christian unity apart. His rise from humble beginnings to the heights of imperial authority became emblematic of a society teetering on the brink, caught between profound faith and dangerous superstition, between internal discord and external conquest. His story is a testament to the turbulent times when the fate of Byzantium hung in delicate balance, awaiting a leader capable of rallying the remnants of an empire facing both spiritual and military crises. The worldview of the Byzantine canon was not born in the quiet halls of theological debates within the grand academies of the imperial capital. Instead, it took root amidst the harsh realities of frontier life, where martial valour was esteemed far above refined calligraphy, and victories or defeats were perceived as direct manifestations of divine will. Among the young men of this turbulent era was Conon, ambitious, brave, and astute. His remarkable qualities did not go unnoticed, and Emperor Justinian II personally recognised his potential, inviting him into the imperial guard. In this prestigious service, Conon adopted a new, more regal name, Leo, symbolising both his ascent and his imperial aspirations. His career advanced swiftly, driven by his talents as a military leader and a diplomat. The Emperor Anastasius II, appreciating his capabilities, appointed him to a high command, strategos, or military governor, over the prosperous and strategically critical eastern province of Anatolikos, a vital segment of the empire's eastern military administrative district. Leo found himself in command of the most formidable and battle-hardened army within the Byzantine realm, and he was determined to wield it decisively in an effort to restore order and end the chaos that had engulfed the empire. In the year 717, Leo forged an alliance with his friend and fellow strategos, Artavasdos, who governed the region of Armenia. Together, they prepared to confront the mounting threats to Byzantine borders. Leo led his forces to march on Constantinople, capital of the empire, which at that moment was vulnerable and weakened by internal instability. The last of the so-called feeble emperors, Theodosius II, had surrendered the city without resistance and sought refuge in monastic life. On the 25th of March, 717, Leo was crowned in the magnificent cathedral of Hagia Sophia, taking the imperial throne as the new Basileus Sramaeus, a symbol of hope and renewal for Byzantium. Yet, he hardly welcomed the comfort of celebration, for an even greater danger loomed on the horizon. A threat unprecedented in the history of the empire was rapidly approaching. Taking advantage of the Byzantine unrest, the Arab Caliph Suleiman assembled an enormous army and fleet, his sole objective to conquer Constantinople and bring final demise to the Eastern Roman Empire. This was no ordinary campaign, it was total war. Contemporary Arab sources describe an army numbering 120,000 soldiers, commanded by the caliph's brother, Muhammad, supported by a fleet comprising roughly 1,800 vessels. While historians believe these figures might be somewhat exaggerated, there is no doubt that the Arab forces were staggering in scale and strength. By August of that year, merely a few months after Leo's coronation, Muhammad's army advanced to the very walls of Constantinople from the landward side, while the enormous fleet sailed into the Marmara Sea, effectively blockading the city from the sea. The Great Siege of Constantinople of 1717 to 1718 had begun in earnest. In this critical moment, Leo manifested himself as an extraordinary strategist and leader. Foreseeing the need for preparedness, he had secured ample food supplies and ordered repairs, and fortification of the city's legendary walls, ensuring they stood resilient against the coming assault. The Byzantines' most formidable secret weapon, however, was their Greek fire, a deadly, incendiary mixture based on petroleum. This substance could be expelled through special siphons mounted on Byzantine ships known as dromons, whose crews aimed streams of this flaming liquid at enemy vessels. The precise chemical composition of Greek fire remains a subject of debate to this day, but its impact was unequivocally terrifying. It burned fiercely on water, and extinguishing it proved almost impossible, striking sheer terror into the heart of the attacking fleet. When the Arab fleet attempted to enter the Golden Horn harbour, Byzantine dromons launched their furious attack, unleashing streams of Greek fire that set many ships ablaze. A massive portion of the enemy's fleet was destroyed in one fell swoop. This marked the first major victory that significantly boosted the morale of the besieged defenders. The siege endured for an entire year, during which the defenders showed remarkable resilience despite terrible hardships. Winter of those years proved unusually brutal. The cold and scarcity of supplies caused severe suffering in the Arab camp, which was unprepared for such harsh conditions. Starvation and disease seized the besieging forces. Reports tell of soldiers resorting to eating their camels, horses, and, in desperate cases, fallen comrades. Yet, as spring arrived, new Turkish and Egyptian Arab fleets arrived, bringing fresh troops and provisions to sustain the siege. Their arrival rekindled the threat, but Byzantine defenders, led by Leo's strategic foresight and unyielding determination, remained steadfast. The conflict was far from over, but this fierce defense and inventive warfare marked a pivotal moment in Byzantine history, highlighting the resilience and ingenuity that had allowed the empire to withstand challenges for centuries. In this particular moment, luck once again favoured the Byzantine emperor, bringing him a crucial edge in his struggles. Many of the sailors serving on Arab ships were Christian defectors who had abandoned their posts and switched allegiance to the Byzantines, providing valuable intelligence about the enemy's plans. With this insider knowledge, the Byzantine navy launched a renewed assault, employing their famous Greek fire to devastating effect, destroying the Arab reinforcements and significantly weakening the blockade. A decisive turning point came through an unexpected alliance. Emperor Leo II, known for his diplomatic skill, had secretly established a union with the Bulgarian Canterville long before the siege even commenced. When the Arab forces pressed forward, the Bulgarian cavalry struck fiercely at the Arab encampment, delivering a crushing blow that, according to Byzantine sources, resulted in the killing of over 20,000 Saracens. The momentum finally shifted on the 14th of August, in the year 718, exactly 1 year after the siege had begun. Under pressure, Maslama, the Arab commander, issued orders to lift the siege and withdraw their forces from the city. However, this retreat quickly turned into a disaster of epic proportions. The remnants of the Arab land forces, exhausted and demoralized, could not mount an effective escape, and their fleet met a vicious storm while sailing back across the sea. The tempest was so fierce that it obliterated almost all of the ships that remained afloat. Out of the originally formidable fleet of 1,800 vessels, only a handful returned to Syria, their crews battered and their ships shattered. The victory achieved by Leo II was nothing short of comprehensive and unequivocal. Not only did it serve to save Constantinople from imminent danger, but it also preserved the stability of the entire Christian Europe, effectively halting the Arab advance into the continent. In its historical significance, the Battle of Constantinople in the year 718 can be compared to the Battle of Poitiers in the year 732. Just as Charles Martel's forces stopped the Muslim invasion into Gaul at that pivotal moment, Leo II's triumph secured a critical frontier for Christendom. As a result, Leo II was celebrated as a national hero and a saviour of his homeland. His authority within the army and among the populace was absolute and unquestioned. This immense prestige empowered him to initiate reforms aimed at strengthening the empire and securing divine protection for its future. Leo was a devout man, but his faith was characteristic of a soldier's straightforward conviction, simple, stern, and intolerant of what he viewed as superstition or distortion of true doctrine. He believed that the numerous military defeats inflicted upon the empire before his reign were divine punishment for humanity's sins. Among these transgressions, his advisors from Asia Minor pointed to what they perceived as idolatry, namely the veneration of icons, and possibly his own Syrian heritage, which they regarded as a form of pagan idol worship. Having defeated the Arabs on the battlefield with their own weapons, Leo now sought victory in the ideological and spiritual realm. He aimed to cleanse Byzantine Christianity of elements that appeared to make it vulnerable to Muslim criticism. He envisioned himself as the empire's saviour and a reformer of its religious faith. Yet, he did not anticipate that such efforts might bring more harm than the Arab swords had ever caused. After this great victory and the consolidation of his authority, Leo II delayed embarking on major religious reforms, choosing instead to focus on restoring the empire's strength. During the initial years of his rule, he dedicated much effort to the renewal of political, military, and administrative stability. Having inherited a realm ravaged by decades of chaos and warfare, Leo undertook the reorganization of the army, implemented administrative reforms, and, most notably, issued a new legal code called the Ecloga. Unlike the Code of Justinian, which was written in Latin and reflected the Latin-speaking tradition, the Ecloga was composed in Greek, making it more accessible and intelligible to the common people. This legal compilation embodied the harsh morals of its time and of the emperor himself, introducing widespread use of corporal punishment for crimes such as theft, treason, or intimidation, ranging from cutting off noses and tongues to blinding offenders. These measures were intended to impose strict discipline and order across the empire. Yet beneath all these efforts, the idea of purifying the faith persisted in Leo's mind. A catalyst for more drastic measures came from an unexpected event: the eruption of a volcano between the islands of Terra and Terraesia in the year 726. To the emperor and his immediate circle, the event was unquestionably perceived as a clear sign of divine wrath. Soon after this ominous occurrence, he initiated a campaign that would become one of the most significant religious upheavals of his reign. This initiative, however, was not carried out impulsively or on a whim. Rather, it was preceded by a series of sermons and earnest warnings aimed at convincing both the populace and the clergy of the harmfulness and spiritual danger of venerating icons. The emperor's advocate, a fierce opponent of iconographical worship, sought to persuade the people and church leaders that such practices were idolatrous and deviations from true faith. His support came from a faction within the episcopate, notably from ecclesiastical figures originating from Asia Minor, among them Bishop Constantine of Nicolia and Metropolitan Thomas of Cladion. These bishops shared his doctrinal views and provided him with theological justifications, often quoting early church fathers out of context, selecting phrases from their writings that warned against pagan idolatry, but ignoring the broader orthodox interpretation. The first public act of iconoclasm was the infamous order to destroy the image of Christ that was displayed over the gates of the Hagia main entrance, erected in the imperial palace complex. Historians date this event to either the year 726 or, according to some sources, to 730. This act held profound symbolic significance. It was not merely a destruction of a decorative religious image, but a statement that challenged the very heart of imperial and spiritual authority. The gates at Hagia were not simply an entrance into a royal residence. They had become a sacred site, emblematic of the imperial throne itself, a nexus of political and spiritual power in the empire. By obliterating the icon here, Emperor Leo IV was making a bold, sacrilegious statement meant to undermine the entire system of veneration that had been central to Byzantine piety for centuries. The immediate public reaction was intense and tumultuous. The act sparked outrage among the people, and a violent protest ensued, culminating in the murder of an imperial official involved in executing this edict. This incident vividly demonstrated how deeply rooted the veneration of icons was in the collective consciousness of the society. In response, the authorities suppressed the uprising with brutal force. The ringleaders of the riot were executed, and many participants faced corporal punishment or exile as a harsh warning to others contemplating defiance. This event marked the beginning of a deepening schism within the empire's religious landscape. The primary opponent of the emperor within the imperial capital was the venerable patriarch German Fra of Constantinople, a man who, despite his advanced age, enjoyed immense respect and authority among the faithful. Recognizing the danger posed by this doctrinal dissent, Emperor Leo sought to persuade the patriarch to renounce his opposition. He argued that venerating icons was not idolatrous, but rooted in the Church's doctrinal teaching concerning the incarnation of Christ. When Leo demanded that Germans sign the Iconoclastic edict, authorizing the destruction of sacred images, the patriarch responded with a famous statement. He asserted that without convening an ecumenical council, he could not change or alter the faith that had been historically upheld by the universal church. His reply underscored the principle that doctrine could not be arbitrarily modified by imperial decree alone. In the year 730, Emperor Leo took decisive measures. He deposed and exiled Patriarch German, refusing to accept his defiance. In his place, a compliant church leader was appointed, an obedient figure who would toe the imperial line. From this moment onward, iconoclasm was officially adopted as the policy of the entire empire, with the imperial authorities issuing a decree that mandated the removal of all icons from churches, public buildings, and communal spaces, as well as their subsequent destruction. This edict triggered widespread resistance and anger, especially in regions less influenced by central imperial authority. In the Greek mainland, known as the Theme of Hellas, open rebellion erupted. Local armies and naval forces declared their allegiance to a rival claimant, Nechaev Cosma, and initiated a march toward the imperial capital, attempting to restore what they considered rightful faith. Their uprising, however, was swiftly and ruthlessly suppressed. The loyal Byzantine navy, commanded by the emperor's forces and utilizing the deadly incendiary substance known as Greek fire, decisively defeated the rebel fleet. Cosma was captured and executed, and the insurrection was drowned in blood, reaffirming imperial authority. Yet, perhaps the most devastating blow to the iconoclastic movement came from beyond the borders of the empire, from the heart of their Arab-controlled territories. From the monastery of Saint Sabas, situated in Palestine, a voice of enormous theological authority sounded, none other than the revered monk and theologian John of Damascus. As a subject of the Caliph, he was beyond the reach of the Byzantine emperor's wrath, and could openly speak his mind. His powerful doctrinal defense for the veneration of holy images became a theological rallying point for advocates of icon veneration, also known as iconodules. John of Damascus composed a series of arguments, 3 key defenses that refuted the accusations of the iconoclasts and reinforced the orthodox legitimacy of honouring sacred images. His reasoning was rooted in an impeccable knowledge of Scripture and the writings of the early Church Fathers, and he employed logical rigour and deep theological insight to dismantle the opponent's claims. One of the main objections he addressed was the biblical prohibition found in the Old Testament: "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image," which iconoclasts used to justify their rejection of sacred images. He explained that this prohibition was originally directed at Jews who were prone to idol worship, and it related specifically to the depiction of the invisible God. However, after God's word became flesh and dwelled among us, full of grace and truth, the situation changed dramatically. He pointed out that in ancient times, God, being incorporeal and formless, was never depicted visually. But now, with the incarnation of Christ, who has appeared in the flesh and lived among mankind, the visible representation of God became permissible. Furthermore, he made a clear distinction between 2 different forms of reverence: worship or latria, which is due only to God himself, and veneration or dulia, which can be given to sacred objects and saints. He emphasized that following the teachings of Saint Basil the Great, the veneration paid to an image does not transfer to matter itself, but rather it directs honor to the prototype or divine reality that the image represents. In the words of this defender of icons, we do not simply kiss a wooden board or paint, but rather we honor the one depicted, whether it be Christ, the Virgin Mary, or the saints. He also asserted that matter itself is not evil. God, the Creator, made the material world, and when he incarnated, he sanctified matter through his presence. As a result, objects like wood and paints can serve as means for spiritual enlightenment and sanctification of the believer. Rejecting icons, in his view, was akin to falling into the heresy of Manichaeism, which considered matter inherently evil. These theological arguments were secretly copied, transported into the empire, and widely circulated. They provided icon venerators with powerful intellectual and spiritual tools to defend and reinforce their position against iconoclasm. The reaction from the Pope of Rome was no less vehement. Pope Gregory II, and later Pope Gregory III, openly refused to recognize the imperial edicts aimed at destroying icons. In their correspondence with the Byzantine Emperor Leo II, the popes displayed a surprising boldness for that era, asserting that the emperor should focus on political affairs, while bishops should oversee ecclesiastical matters. They warned that if the emperor continued to threaten the church, clergy and faithful would retreat into their faith communities, and he would be chasing after wind. In response, the Pope convened a council in Rome that decried and anathematized the iconoclasts, those who sought to destroy religious images. This led Emperor Leo to seize papal estates in southern Italy and Sicily, redistributing ecclesiastical authority from Rome to the Patriarchate of Constantinople. Thus, the religious conflict within the Byzantine Empire spilled over into a deep political schism between Rome and Constantinople, ultimately culminating in the profound and historic Great Schism of the year 1054. Leo II died in the year 741, leaving behind an empire that, despite being protected from external enemies, was torn apart by internal religious strife. He believed his actions served the good of both state and church, but his blunt, soldierly approach failed to grasp the full depths of Byzantine piety and tradition. In opening the Pandora's box of iconoclasm, he unwittingly unleashed forces that his successors would have to contend with, demons born from fierce religious intolerance. If Leo II was primarily a pragmatic ruler, driven by concerns of political stability and military strength, his son and heir, Constantine I, was an entirely different figure. He was a passionate, uncompromising ideologue, a zealous and ruthless iconoclast, whose fervent devotion to the destruction of images earned him a notorious reputation. Icon worshippers mortified him with a humiliating nickname, Capro Nim, meaning dung name or manure name, along with spreading the malicious legend that he had defiled the baptismal font as an infant. This black myth served to deepen the hatred and revulsion directed at him, symbolizing the fierce opposition he faced. Despite these vicious slanders, even his enemies could not deny two crucial facts. Constantine V was undoubtedly one of the most brilliant military leaders in Byzantine history, renowned for his strategic genius and battlefield prowess. At the same time, he was also one of the most brutal and methodical persecutors of the icons and their followers, employing relentless methods in his ideological crusade. His reign marked a period of severe iconoclasm, where faith and brutality intertwined, leaving a complex legacy that would shape the religious and political landscape of Byzantium for generations to come. His reign began amidst a period of profound turmoil and upheaval. Immediately following the death of Leo II, a fierce conflict erupted over the imperial throne. Constantine faced a rebellion led by his own former father-in-law, Artavast, the very individual who had once aided Leo in ascending to power. Artavast, who was married to Leo's daughter Anna, declared himself a defender of icons, positioning himself in opposition to Constantine's policies. He managed to seize control of Constantinople, establishing himself as emperor and challenging Constantine's authority. For a brief time, icons were reinstated in the city's churches. They were restored to their rightful place of veneration. However, Constantine, who had fled the imperial city and retreated to Asia Minor, refused to surrender, relying heavily on the loyal and steadfast Anatolian provinces, where iconoclastic sentiments remained strongest among the populace. He engaged in a fierce and persistent civil war that dragged on for more than a year. Finally, in the year 743, Constantine's forces achieved a decisive victory over the armies of Artavast. He laid siege to and ultimately captured Constantinople, bringing an end to the usurper's reign. The aftermath of this victory was marked by brutal retribution. Artavast and his sons were publicly punished. They were blinded on the hippodrome in a gruesome spectacle designed to eliminate any hope of future rebellion. Many of their supporters faced execution or were badly mutilated to serve as stark warnings to others. With this victory, Constantine V regained his throne, and there was now nothing standing in the way of completing what his father had initiated. Unlike his father, Constantine was not only a skilled warrior and military strategist, but also a well-educated intellectual. He regarded himself as a serious theologian and took a personal interest in religious debates. Demonstrating his scholarly dedication, he authored several theological treatises in an effort to establish a robust and authoritative ideological foundation for the iconoclast movement. His arguments were more refined and sophisticated than those of his predecessors, reflecting a deepening complexity in the theological discourse surrounding the issue of icons. Central to Constantine's reasoning was a contentious and highly debated Christological dilemma, which he believed posed an insurmountable obstacle to the veneration of images. He asserted that the very idea of depicting Christ through art was fundamentally impossible. If an artist's representation only captured Christ's human nature, then it necessarily ignored his divine aspect. Such an image would therefore be incomplete, risking the heretical separation of Christ's humanity from his divinity, a concept akin to the Nestorian heresy. Conversely, if the artist attempted to depict both Christ's divine and human natures in a single image, he would either be portraying the unrepresentable divine essence, which was sacrilegious, or blending two distinct natures into a single one, thus adopting the monophysite heresy. Consequently, in Constantine's view, all images of Christ, icons or otherwise, were heretical. He believed that the only appropriate Christian symbol was the cross, representing Christ's victory over sin and death. The depiction of Christ's likeness in icon form, according to his doctrine, was inherently problematic and unjustifiable. Furthermore, he explicitly condemned the veneration of images of the Virgin Mary and the saints, viewing such practices as outright idolatry and diluting the unique mediatory role of Christ, who alone serves as the central bridge between humanity and God. To elevate his theological position to the level of universal truth, Constantine convened a Grand Church Council in the year 754, held at the Palace of Ares, located on the Asiatic shore of the Bosporus. The purpose of this assembly was to definitively condemn images and put an end to the icon veneration once and for all. The council assembled Tritit Vocem bishops from various parts of the Christian world, a significant showing of ecclesiastical authority. However, the gathering was marked by a notable absence. None of the 5 so-called patriarchs, those leading the major centres of Christianity, were present. The Patriarch of Constantinople had been deliberately left absent, serving as a widowed and politically cautious figure. Meanwhile, the Patriarchs of Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem had either been compelled by political circumstances, being under Arab control, or had chosen to oppose the imperial policies, and thus refused to send representatives or legates to participate. As a result, the council technically did not represent the entire Christian church and could not be considered genuinely ecumenical. Despite this, the bishops present, carefully chosen, guided, and influenced by Constantine, unanimously approved and formalized the iconoclastic doctrines. The rulings of the council were unequivocal. It declared that veneration of religious images was a heinous heresy, a diabolical innovation that must be eradicated. All supporters of icon veneration, especially prominent figures like the Patriarch Herman and John Dumachin, were condemned and anathematized in a solemn decree. Armed with the authority of this council, Constantine launched an all-out crusade against icons. Across the vast territories of the empire, specially trained detachments of officials and soldiers actively stormed churches, striking at the symbols of the venerable practice. The campaign was relentless and brutal, aimed at stamping out what they viewed as the root of idol worship within Christian devotion. Throughout a period of intense upheaval, the walls of churches and monasteries underwent a profound transformation. Guardians of sacred images began to dismantle mosaics, erasing remnants of divine art from their surfaces. Frescoes depicting holy figures were obliterated with lime plaster, and precious icons, once revered as sacred treasures, were burned on bonfires, consumed by flames in a sweeping campaign of iconoclasm. Instead of divine representations, the walls of these temples were gradually decorated with secular motifs. Scenes from everyday life, birds perched on branches, lush foliage, various animals, and lively scenes of hunting or equestrian pursuits on the hippodrome. This deliberate effort aimed to entirely secularize what had long been regarded as a sacred space, stripping away its spiritual significance and replacing it with mundane images that disconnected the churches from their divine origins. Despite these widespread changes, a resilient bastion of icon veneration remained, namely the monasteries. It was these secluded communities that became the most steadfast and unwavering defenders of holy icons. The monks there tirelessly devoted themselves to copying and disseminating the works of John of Damascus, a venerated proponent of icon veneration, ensuring that the sacred images continued to inspire and nurture faith among the people. They actively protected the icons, hid them from imperial decree, and spread oral traditions among the masses, rallying believers who refused to accept the enforced iconoclasm. But this act of defiance drew the fierce ire of Emperor Constantine V. He regarded the monks' unwavering devotion as idolatry, mockingly describing them as idol worshippers wrapped in dark robes. His wrath descended upon them with relentless force. Open persecutions erupted, rivaling the brutal persecutions waged by pagan emperors against early Christians. Monasteries were systematically shut down, their rich properties confiscated by the state treasury. The buildings that once sheltered monks and nuns were repurposed, transformed into barracks, warehouses, or even public baths. Monks and nuns were forcibly married, a stark violation of their vows, as the emperor sought to humiliate and break their spiritual resistance. Those who refused to comply faced brutal punishments, torture chambers, imprisonment, or even execution. Among the most renowned martyrs of this era was Saint Stephen the New, an abbot of a monastery on Mount Axentiev. He was highly respected for his unwavering faith. When the imperial authorities ordered his arrest for refusing to obey the decisions of the Church Council of Hagia, he was exiled. Yet, even in exile, he continued to secretly support the defenders of icons. Enraged, the emperor ordered his immediate transfer to Constantinople. There, after a courageous interrogation where Saint Stephen defended his beliefs with steadfast conviction, he was thrown into prison. Soon after, he was handed over to the crowd, his body dragged through the streets, battered and bloodied, until only a gruesome, mangled mass of flesh remained. The emperor, unconcerned by his own brutality, executed similar tactics against other monks and nuns. Public humiliations became routine. Monks were made to march in unison along the hippodrome, jeering crowds jeering at their expense. An icon painter named Lazarus was forced to burn his own artistic works. When he refused, cruelly, his hands were scorched with red-hot metal plates, a brutal punishment designed to break his spirit. Despite such cruelty, Emperor Constantine V remained highly esteemed among his soldiers. His reputation as a victorious military leader brought him admiration. He orchestrated 9 successful campaigns against the Bulgarians, inflicting crushing defeats that secured the northern borders of the empire for many years. On the eastern front, he also engaged in successful battles against the Arabs, further solidifying his image as a fortunate and invincible commander. To the soldiers, Constantine V appeared as the embodiment of divine favour, with his triumphs serve as unwavering proof that God supported the Iconoclasts. As a result, society found itself sharply divided. On one side stood the army, the urban bureaucracy of the capital, and a segment of the bishops who supported imperial policies. On the other side were the monastic communities, the majority of the common people, especially in the more remote and European provinces, and the Western Church centred in Rome, which remained staunchly loyal to the veneration of icons. The reign of Constantine V marked the zenith of iconoclasm, a period when the imperial power relentlessly pursued its campaign to eradicate sacred images, completing the brutal policies initiated by his father with ruthless resolve. It seemed, at least for a time, that the era of icon worship in Byzantium was effectively over. Yet, history, with its unpredictable twists, was already preparing for a surprising turnaround. After the death of this formidable Iconoclast emperor in the year 775, the course of events was destined to change dramatically. In the wake of his reign, a new figure emerged, one who would ultimately overturn the seemingly invincible logic of iconoclasm and shift the spiritual trajectory of the empire once more. It appeared that the policies of Constantine V had marked the final chapter in the long, tumultuous story of sacred images within Byzantine society. However, history's complex, inexorable flow was poised to bring a new, unforeseen chapter to light, one that would breathe life back into the veneration of icons and challenge the rigid orthodoxy that had taken hold. His son, Leo V, inherited the imperial throne and continued the iconoclastic policies his father had begun, though with noticeably less fervour. Yet, his reign was brief. In the year of 780, Leo the Fan passed away, leaving behind a 10-year-old son, Constantine VI, and his widow, Empress Irene. It was at this moment that one of the most dramatic and captivating chapters in Byzantine history unfolded. To the forefront stepped a woman, authoritative, intelligent, ambitious, and most notably secretive about her true religious convictions. Irene was a native of Athens, a city that, unlike other parts of the empire, had largely evaded the deep-rooted influence of iconoclasm. Married off to the heir to the throne for political reasons, she was compelled to conceal her genuine religious beliefs, while at the imperial court, dominated by her formidable father-in-law, the Emperor Leo III, a staunch iconoclast. However, now, as regent for her young son, she wielded real power. Recognizing this, she resolved to use her authority to restore what had been systematically dismantled and suppressed. Her approach was marked by extraordinary caution, combined with shrewd political insight. Irene was acutely aware that the iconoclast faction remained powerful, especially within the army, which still carried the veneration of Emperor Constantine V's memory. Additionally, many high-ranking church officials appointed by the iconoclastic emperors and supportive of their cause continued to hold influential positions. She understood that any reckless move could ignite rebellion or cause her to lose her newly acquired authority. During her early years as regent, Irene focused on consolidating her position. She systematically replaced loyal supporters with her adherents in key military, administrative, and ecclesiastical posts, removing those committed to iconoclasm. She also used generous rewards and patronage to ensure the unwavering loyalty of the palace guard and other influential groups. Her diplomatic skills facilitated external success. She secured peace with the Arabs and repelled Slavic raids, strengthening her political standing even further. Confident that the time had come, Irene began to take active steps toward her ultimate goal, the restoration of the veneration of icons and the reconciliation of the Church with its traditional practices. The first target of her efforts was the Patriarchate of Constantinople. In the year of 784, Patriarch Paul, an ardent iconoclast, suddenly resigned under what appeared to be duress, or possibly driven by internal guilt and remorse. Before his death, he confessed to his iconoclastic beliefs and declared that the only way to heal the rift within the Church was to convene an ecumenical council. This declaration was exactly what Irene needed. She orchestrated the so-called universal election of a new patriarch. Her choice fell on her trusted secretary and confidant, Tarasius, a man of worldly experience, but renowned for his piety, learning, and unwavering devotion to icon veneration. Tarasius agreed to accept the position, but only on the condition that a general council be convened, one that would condemn the heresy of iconoclasm and restore unity with the Roman Church and other Eastern churches. Planning the council was carried out in the utmost secrecy. Irene and Tarasius sent invitations not only to the Pope, Adrian the Fair, who responded enthusiastically, sending his legates, but also to the patriarchs of the Eastern churches. The latter, under Arab rule and hampered by distance, sent their representatives offering their formal condemnations of iconoclasm. The assembly was scheduled for August of the year 786 and was to take place in Constantinople in the Church of the Holy Apostles. Yet, the iconoclast faction did not remain inactive. As the bishops and clergy gathered in the imperial capital and prepared to open the council's first session, loyal troops, soldiers of the city's garrison, stormed into the church, prepared to use force to prevent the council from proceeding, aiming to preserve the legacy of Emperor Constantine V and his policies of icon destruction. Threatening with weapons, they forcefully dispersed the cathedral congregation, declaring that they would not allow the decisions of the Holy Sixth Ecumenical Council of the year 754 to be revoked or ignored. This act represented a severe setback, a significant defeat for those who supported the veneration of icons. Yet, Irina did not break under this blow. Instead, she pretended to yield to the overwhelming force arrayed against her. She staged a maneuver, giving the appearance of capitulation, and ordered the dismissal of the bishops, effectively dispersing their assembly. However, this was only a calculated step in her broader strategy. Soon after, she struck back with a well-considered counter-offensive. Under the pretext of launching a new campaign against the Arabs, Irina withdrew from the imperial residence the rebellious guard regiments, which she then dispatched to Asia Minor. There, these troops were officially disbanded, depriving the anti-iconoclast faction of their military strength within the capital. In their place, she introduced into Constantinople a contingent of troops drawn from the European themes, those distinguished military districts loyal to her personally, and more inclined to support the veneration of sacred images. By strengthening her military position and reducing the threat of internal rebellion, she effectively cleared the way for her next move. Having eliminated the immediate military danger, Irina turned her attention to reconciling with the church authorities. She appointed a new ecumenical council for the year 1787. This was a carefully planned step designed to prevent further disturbances and to legitimize her religious policies once again. As part of this initiative, she decided to hold the council in a city laden with symbolic significance, Nicaea, the very same city where, in the year 325, the First Ecumenical Council had convened, producing the Nicene Creed, a cornerstone of Christian doctrine. The choice of Nicaea was, therefore, profoundly meaningful, embodying both historical continuity and doctrinal affirmation. The Seventh Ecumenical Council convened in Nicaea in September of the year 787. The assembly was substantial, with approximately 350 bishops in attendance, along with papal legates and representatives from the Eastern Patriarchates. The presiding authority was Patriarch Tarasius, whose leadership underscored the council's importance. Over the course of about a month, the council members meticulously examined and systematically refuted all tenets and decisions of the Iconoclast Synod that had taken place nearly 2 centuries earlier. They quoted extensively from sacred scripture and the writings of the Father of the Church to demonstrate the theological correctness and necessity of venerating holy icons. This gathering also invited bishops who had previously supported iconoclasm and who had now repented for their errors. These individuals publicly renounced their earlier misguided beliefs and were received back into the bosom of the Church with full reconciliation. The The climax of the council was the ratification of the profession of faith, called the Oros, which remains to this day the doctrinal foundation for the veneration of icons in both the Orthodox and Catholic traditions. The Oros explicitly declared that holy and venerable icons are offered to the faithful for worship in the same manner as the sacred cross, the symbol of Christ's passion and victory. Its text emphasized that the reverence shown to an image is ultimately directed to the prototype, meaning the divine reality it represents, since honoring the icon is, in essence, honoring the person depicted within it. The council drew a clear distinction between two types of reverence: the latreia, or worship, which is due to God alone, and the timitiki proska kenesis, or veneration, which is appropriate to icons. This clarified that the latter does not equate to worship in the strict sense, but involves respectful acknowledgement that venerates what the image points to. On the 23rd day of October in the same year, the final session of the council was held in the renowned Magnavra Palace of Constantinople. Present at this solemn gathering were the Empress Irina, her son Constantine VI, and other high-ranking officials. The Oros was signed, and the icons were officially restored to their rightful place within the church's liturgical and devotional practices. It seemed as if the long-standing dispute and confrontation had finally come to an end, and victory belonged to the defenders of icon veneration. However, despite this apparent triumph, Irina's victory was clouded by personal tragedy and her relentless quest for power. As her son grew older, he attempted, on several occasions, to remove her from the reins of authority, leading to a bitter struggle for control. This internal power struggle erupted into a violent and devastating event in the year 797, when, by her orders, her own son, the young emperor, was seized. He was brought to the very same richly decorated, porphyry-clad bedchamber where he had been born, and there he was subjected to a brutal mutilation. His eyes were cruelly brute-forcefully gouged out. He soon succumbed to his injuries, dying as a result of the inflicted wounds. Irina thus became the first woman in Byzantine history to rule the empire not as a regent acting on behalf of a male ruler, but as a sovereign autocrat, an absolute monarch wielding power personally. Her reign, however, was notably brief. After only about 4 years at the top, she was overthrown in a palace coup. The usurpers exiled her to the island of Lesbos, where she lived out her remaining days in obscurity and poverty, far from the corridors of imperial authority. The woman who had once restored the veneration of icons and sought to uphold the legacy of the early church ultimately ended her life as an outcast and a fugitive, her ambitions and achievements diminished and overshadowed by personal downfall. Her life's work, once so passionately driven and historically significant, proved to be fragile and ultimately ephemeral, reminding all of how even the most influential figures are vulnerable to the tides of political and personal fate. The Iconoclast movement, though defeated and pushed into the shadows, had not been completely eradicated. It merely went into hiding, patiently waiting for the right moment to re-emerge with renewed vigour. After the triumph of the Nicene Council and the overthrow of Empress Irene, it seemed as if the Byzantine Empire had permanently restored its allegiance to the veneration of holy images. The emperors who succeeded Irene on the imperial throne, Nikephoros I, Michael I, and Rangabe, were all devoted iconophiles, believers who supported and promoted the veneration of icons within the church and state. Icons made their way back into the churches, and monastic communities regained their influence, once more playing a significant role in religious and cultural life. However, the world was a fragile place, and the sentiments that fed the iconoclast heresy, though suppressed, remained alive beneath the surface. These feelings, while subdued, had not vanished entirely. They lingered in the very environment where they first took root, in the army. Soldiers and officers from eastern regions, especially, harboured nostalgic memories of the era of Emperor Constantine the Fourth of Cordoba and his vigorous campaigns. To them, his reign symbolised formidable military victories, strong authority, and a strict sense of order, values they held dear. In stark contrast, the period of religious restoration, marked by the return of icons, was overshadowed by a string of humiliating military defeats. Once the pride of the empire's armies, the frontier defences and military prestige suffered continuous setbacks. Once again, the primary adversaries on the northern borders were the Bulgarians, an ancient and persistent threat. Under the leadership of their newly energetic and ruthless Khan, Krum, the Bulgarians transformed into a deadly menace that imperiled the very existence of Byzantium. In the year of grand imperial ambition, 1811, the Byzantine Emperor Nicephor assembled a massive army and launched a daring campaign into Bulgaria. His forces succeeded in capturing and burning the Bulgarian capital of Pliska, a move that seemed to promise victory. Yet, on their retreat, disaster struck. The army fell into an ambush within the narrow confines of the Verbej Gorge. It was a harrowing slaughter. Almost the entire army was annihilated, and the emperor himself perished in the chaos. According to legend, Khan Krum, in a macabre display of conquest, ordered the creation of a goblet from the emperor's skull, reinforced with silver, from which he drank, an act as symbolic of the devastating defeat as it was a humiliation for the empire. This catastrophe can be compared only to the imperial loss suffered by Emperor Valens at Adrianople, a historic blow that shook the very foundations of Byzantine power. 2 years later, in 1813, the next emperor, Michael V, faced the same brutal reality when he suffered a decisive defeat at the Battle of Versinikia at the hands of Krum. The campaign had opened the gates for the Bulgarian forces to march unchallenged toward Constantinople itself. In this atmosphere of military catastrophe and widespread despair, the heretical ideas of iconoclasm gained a dangerous second wind. In the armies and among the troops, voices openly questioned whether divine favour remained with Byzantium, suggesting that God had turned away from the imperial rulers, whom they viewed as heretics, having forsaken the true faith. The defeats inflicted by the pagan Bulgarians were interpreted as divine punishment for abandoning the authentic worship of icons, which was thought to be a divine safeguard and source of strength in earlier times. In moments of desperation, soldiers would gather at the tomb of Constantine the Great, praying fervently for his resurrection, hoping that he might intervene and save the crumbling empire. It was during this period of turmoil and disillusionment that a new leader emerged to stir the embattled nation. The demoralised Emperor Michael the Thane was quickly deposed, his authority cracked and fragile beneath the weight of military failures and internal strife. In his place stepped a talented military leader, a strategos named Theophilos, also known as Anatolikos Leo I, of Armenian origin. Often called Leo the Lion because of his resemblance to the regal animal, he was a vigorous and determined soldier, an experienced commander, and a pragmatic statesman. Unlike his predecessor, who was a fervent supporter of the iconoclast heresy, Leo was not a fanatic of theological debates. Instead, his stance on icons was primarily driven by political considerations. He recognized that the army, the main pillar supporting the throne, was eager to restore the traditional veneration of icons, viewing it as a way to unify and strengthen the state. Accordingly, Leo decided to grant the military what it yearned for, a return to familiar practices, thus reinforcing his authority and boosting morale. Soon after ascending to the throne, Leo faced a formidable challenge. Bulgarian forces, under Krum, laid siege to Constantinople, pressing the city's defences to their limits. In response, Leo successfully organised a blockade that forced the Bulgarians into a difficult position, stabilising the imperial front. Once the immediate danger was repelled and his grip on power reinforced, he turned his attention to deeper strategic initiatives. Among his early measures was the formation of a special commission led by a young, well-educated theologian, John Grammaticus. Their task was to scrutinise the writings of the early church fathers, those revered authorities whose teachings shaped orthodoxy, and to seek within their works citations that condemned the veneration of icons. This initiative was part of Leo's broader political strategy. By finding authoritative quotes condemning icons, he aimed to legitimise a more cautious approach to icon veneration, aligning religious doctrine with current imperial politics. The aim was to quell internal dissent, restore stability, and reassert imperial authority, all while navigating the treacherous waters of theological debate and military threat. Through these measured and pragmatic steps, Leo sought to restore the strength and unity of the empire, aware that victory depended on both military resilience and careful religious policy. He called a debate between Patriarch Nikephoros, the staunch defender of icon veneration, and others, attempting to sway him toward compromise. His suggestion was simple. Perhaps the icons displayed low in the churches, which people kissed, could be moved higher up, making it impossible for worshippers to engage in such gestures. Yet, Patriarch Nikephoros, much like his predecessor Germanus, remained unwavering in his resolve. Alongside other prominent defenders of iconic imagery, most notably the abbot of the renowned Studian monastery, Saint Theodoros Studites, he boldly declared to the emperor that they would not depart from the doctrines reaffirmed at the Seventh Ecumenical Council. Their steadfastness sparked a severe crackdown from the imperial side. In 1815, Emperor Leo V did not merely suppress the opposition, he deposed and exiled Patriarch Nikephoros altogether. A new patriarch, a known iconoclast, was appointed in his place. Subsequently, another church council convened in the Hagia Sophia, which repudiated the decisions of the Council of Nicaea held in 1787 and reinstated the decrees from the First Iconoclastic Council of 754. Thus, a second wave of iconoclasm was unleashed, perhaps not as widespread or blood-soaked as the reign of Constantine V, but no less brutal in its methods. Once again, the decisive blows targeted the most irreconcilable opponents, especially the monastic community. Saint Theodoros Studites, the chief ideologue and leader of resistance, was arrested, tortured, and exiled. Hundreds of monks and bishops, those who refused to accept and sign the imperial decrees forbidding veneration, were thrown into prisons or sent into exile. Despite these fierce measures, Emperor Leo V's rule proved brief. He was assassinated in 1820 in a conspiracy orchestrated by his former friend and confidant, Michael the Trampler. The plotters struck during the Christmas service within the palace church. Leo V, seizing a heavy cross from the altar in a desperate attempt to defend himself, fought fiercely, but his enemies overwhelmed him. In the end, he was brutally hacked to pieces. Seizing the throne was Michael II, the Amorian, a soldier of rough manners and limited education, who had little interest in theological debates. His stance on iconoclasm was moderate. He ceased the most violent persecutions and released many iconophile prisoners, including Saint Theodoros Studites. Nevertheless, he upheld the imperial laws banning icons. He sought a middle ground, proposing that people stop worshipping icons but not destroy them altogether. Both factions, those who revered icons and those who opposed them, rejected this half-hearted policy. Michael II's reign was overshadowed by a massive civil uprising led by a Slav called Famus, which nearly shattered the empire. Among the rulers of the second iconoclastic period, the most intriguing and paradoxical was his son, Theophilos. Ascending to the throne in 1829, Theophilos was the complete antithesis of his father. He was among the most educated and cultivated emperors in Byzantine history. A passionate bibliophile and a patron of the sciences and arts, he admired Arab culture and undertook grand construction projects in Constantinople, emulating the luxury of the Abbasid caliphs. He loved engaging in theological debates and regarded himself as a guardian of pure doctrine. Yet, despite his love for art and learning, Theophilos was a committed iconoclast. Under his rule, the persecution of icon worshippers intensified anew. His campaigns were not solely driven by religious conviction, but also, crucially, by a desire to assert his authority over the church, refusing to accept the church's independence in defining doctrine. This new wave of iconoclasm, led under his reign, was more aggressive than before, targeting not only the images themselves, but also the very authority of those who believed in their veneration. One of the most renowned and pivotal episodes in the history of Byzantine persecutions revolves around the tragic story of two brothers, Theodore and Theophanes. These siblings became martyrs not merely for their faith, but for their unwavering dedication to the veneration of icons, which at the time had plunged the empire into a fierce and prolonged theological controversy. Their steadfastness in the face of brutal torture is widely remembered. They endured agonizing suffering and, as a testament to their devotion, symbols of their faith and loyalty were etched onto their foreheads through burning, a cruel form of punishment that left visible, lingering scars. Due to these acts of resistance, they earned distinctive nicknames. Theodore was called the Fiery for the flames that marked him, and Theophanes the Burning because of his enduring flames of conviction. These brothers became emblematic of the iconodule cause, embodying the resilience and spiritual fervour that many sought to uphold in turbulent times. In a broader context, their story was intertwined with the reign of the enlightened and influential emperor Theophilos, a ruler often remembered for his vigorous attempts to suppress the veneration of icons. Despite the empire's tumult, similar to the dramatic saga involving the brothers, history was poised to repeat itself with striking resemblance. Centuries earlier, a formidable emperor who championed iconoclasm was succeeded by his widow, a pious woman committed to the cause of icon veneration. This pattern of power transfer was almost cyclical, as if history was echoing itself across generations. The last emperor of the iconoclastic era was Theophilos, whose sudden death in the year 842 left behind a fragile state and a young heir to the throne. Before his passing, according to popular legend, he experienced a moment of deep remorse for his persecution of iconophiles. It is said that, near death, he kissed a revered icon brought to him by his wife, Empress Theodora, and earnestly pleaded for divine forgiveness for his actions. Whether or not this heartfelt act occurred as recorded, it has become a symbol of the widespread yearning within Byzantine society for spiritual reconciliation and peace after decades of relentless religious strife. The child who inherited the imperial throne was a mere 3 years old. His name was Michael II. With the ruler still a minor, the regency was entrusted to his mother, Empress Theodora, a woman of profound faith and steely resolve. Like Empress Irene, she was a secret iconophile, secretly revering sacred images even during her husband's reign, when open venerations were banned. She kept icons concealed in her chamber, nurturing her devotion in private despite the risks involved. Now, with the reins of power in her hands, Theodora harboured an unwavering determination to eliminate iconoclasm completely. Yet, she was also cautious, having learned from the bitter experience of her predecessor. Rather than making impulsive, sweeping moves, she adopted a subtle strategy, carefully laying the groundwork to restore reverence for icons. In the initial phase, Theodora chose not to confront the existing iconoclastic patriarch, John Grammaticus, who had served as an influential advisor to her late husband and maintained a formidable position within the church hierarchy. Instead, she quietly began consolidating her support among her most loyal allies. Central among these was a powerful eunuch, the Logothetes Dromos, who held the prestigious position of the head of the External Affairs and Postal Service, an influential figure with extensive connections. Under his guidance and her leadership, Theodora started to craft a plan for a silent but effective coup against the iconoclast faction, aiming to re-establish the sacred image's veneration. Over the course of a year, Theodora and her most trusted supporter, Dromos, cultivated alliances within the court, the military, and the influential circles of the city. They engaged in clandestine negotiations, reaching out to prominent supporters of icon veneration, many of whom still suffered in exile or languished in prison because of their beliefs. Their efforts culminated in early the following year, as they sensed that a decisive moment had arrived. The political climate was ripe for change. Empress Theodora successfully orchestrated a political and ecclesiastical upheaval. The old patriarch, John Grammaticus, was accused of conspiracy and was consequently deposed, then exiled to a monastery, marking the end of his influence. In his place, a new patriarch, Methodius, was chosen, an illustrious confessor and a steadfast supporter of the veneration of icons, having suffered persecution himself during the early iconoclastic persecutions. This newly appointed patriarch immediately called a church council in Constantinople, which was not a lengthy or contentious theological debate like the historic First Council of Nicaea. All major doctrinal questions regarding the veneration of icons and related theological disputes had long been resolved. Instead, the assembly focused solely on reaffirming the conclusions of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, which had already condemned iconoclasm and definitively established the legitimacy of icon veneration. The council officially denounced all iconoclasts and their teachings, reaffirming the unlawful nature of their heresy, and proclaimed the complete restoration and official tolerance of images within the empire's religious life. The climax of these momentous events was marked by a grand religious celebration on the first Sunday of the Great Fast, which fell on the 11th of March in the year 843. On that day, Empress Theodora, along with her young son Michael II and the newly enthroned Patriarch Methodius, along with numerous bishops, monks, and vast crowds of devout believers, participated in an elaborate and symbolic procession. This solemn yet festive event stretched from the church of Laherma to the great cathedral of St. Sophia. The procession was a majestic act of collective faith, a public declaration that the age-old iconoclast heresy had finally been repudiated, and that the veneration of sacred images would once again flourish throughout the Byzantine Empire. This event not only symbolized the spiritual victory of the iconodule cause, but also reinforced the unity of church and state. It signified a turning point that would shape Byzantine religious life for generations to come, ending decades of strife and opening a new chapter of religious and cultural flourishing, rooted in reverence for the divine images that Christians held dear. Throughout history, there have been moments when the spiritual and national life of a people converge in a profound act of reconciliation, turning a page on a dark chapter filled with conflict and hostility. Such was the case during one of the most significant and symbolic events in Byzantine history, when long-hidden religious icons, treasures carefully concealed in secret caches and secret chambers, were finally revealed and brought to light. These icons had been diligently hidden away for decades, their existence kept in the shadows for fear of persecution. Their rediscovery was more than just a religious act. It symbolized a collective act of national unity, a solemn step toward healing the wounds inflicted by over 100 years of civil unrest and ideological strife. In that historic moment, the atmosphere was thick with emotion, and the air once again resonated with harmonious singing and the melodious tolling of church bells, signifying the triumph of faith and tradition over iconoclasm and doubt. To commemorate this momentous occasion, the church established an annual celebration held on the first Sunday of Great Lent, a day known as the Triumph of Orthodoxy. This feast has endured through the centuries and remains an integral part of Orthodox Christian tradition to this day. During the solemn services held on this day, a ceremonial prayer is offered to eternalize the memory of all defenders of orthodoxy, accompanied by a formal anathema pronounced against heretics, including those who propagated icon destruction, known as iconoclasts. This event marked the definitive end of one of the bleakest, most turbulent eras in Byzantine history, a period marked by religious strife and societal upheaval. The era of iconoclasm, which had challenged the veneration of sacred images, was finally over. The campaign to suppress and eradicate the veneration of icons was decisively defeated. Attempts by emperors to forcibly reform the faith and subjugate the church through state power ultimately failed, giving way instead to the triumph of traditional Orthodox piety and the veneration of saints' images. The victory of those who cherished icons had far-reaching consequences, shaping not only the future of Byzantium, but also affecting the broader Orthodox civilization that developed in subsequent centuries. The storm of iconoclasm, raging over Byzantium for more than 100 years, eventually subsided, but it left behind deep, unhealed scars on the fabric of the empire, in both its physical monuments and its collective soul. The aftermath of this prolonged civil conflict was complex and persistent, rippling through subsequent history with lasting effects. The most glaring and tragic consequence of this tumultuous period was the enormous loss of cultural heritage. Over the course of more than a century of oppressive persecutions, countless priceless icons, frescoes, mosaics, and illuminated manuscripts created during the pre-iconoclastic centuries were destroyed. Today, we can only imagine the splendor of early Byzantine art through the few surviving masterpieces, preserved against overwhelming odds in remote monasteries, such as the monastery of St. Catherine on Mount Sinai, or in distant lands outside the empire, like Italy. The destruction represented a catastrophic blow to cultural history, a dark void in the narrative of Christian artistic achievement. It was an unparalleled catastrophe, a cultural eclipse, and a black hole in the story of sacred art. Politically, the iconoclast controversy deepened the schism between Constantinople and Rome. The refusal of the Pope to recognize the iconoclastic policies of the Byzantine emperors coupled with retaliatory measures from Byzantium, such as the confiscation of papal possessions, led to a complete rupture between the two great centres of Christian authority. Rome, feeling increasingly alienated from its former metropolitan see, began to seek new spiritual alliances with the Frankish kings of Western Europe. It was precisely during the height of the Iconoclasm debates in the year 800 that Pope Leo II crowned Charlemagne Emperor of the Romans, a move that delivered a symbolic blow to the universal pretensions of Byzantium. The Iconoclast crisis became one of the crucial factors paving the way for the final separation between the Western and Eastern Christian worlds. Within the Byzantine Empire, the controversy forever altered the relationship between church and state. The imperial attempt to dictate theological dogmas to the church proved unsuccessful. After winning the theological and doctrinal battles, the church and, most notably, the monastic community, preserved their spiritual independence and authority. Although the emperor remained a protector and patron of the church, he no longer wielded the same authority to impose or control its doctrinal stance as he had during the iconoclastic period. The victory of orthodoxy in this cultural and theological war ultimately defined the future relationship between secular and religious power, marking a significant turning point in the history of Byzantine civilization, with reverberations that would be felt long into the future. Surprisingly, despite its profound challenges, the iconoclastic crisis ultimately yielded several positive results that significantly shaped the course of Orthodox Christian art and theology. Initially, this period compelled the Church to revisit and deepen its understanding of the sacred image, prompting a more rigorous theological reflection. Influential theologians such as John of Damascus and Theodore the Studite dedicated their efforts to articulating a coherent and profound doctrine surrounding icons, emphasizing their spiritual significance. Their works, alongside the decisions made at the Seventh Ecumenical Council, laid the foundation for a sophisticated theological framework that would guide the future development of Byzantine sacred art. As a consequence, the icon ceased to be regarded merely as a vessel of popular reverence. Instead, it became an integral element of doctrinal teaching. Icons came to be understood as visual expressions of theological truths, an art form through which the divine mysteries could be perceived and contemplated in colour and form. This evolution marked a turning point, transforming the icon from a simple object of veneration into a window onto the divine reality, thereby elevating its role within the spiritual life of the Church. Furthermore, the victory over iconoclasm sparked an extraordinary cultural and spiritual revival, igniting what is often called the Macedonian Renaissance. The subsequent centuries witnessed a flourishing period when Byzantine art, literature, and science entered a phase of renewed vitality and creativity. Churches and basilicas were once again adorned with exquisite mosaics and frescoes, demonstrating unprecedented artistic mastery and devotion. This renewal was underpinned by the development of a precise and carefully codified iconographic canon, established to maintain theological accuracy and artistic uniformity, principles that continue to serve as the backbone of Orthodox iconography even today. The art produced during this era, having endured periods of violent persecution, became more spiritual, more profound, and imbued with theological insight, reflecting a collective yearning to transcend worldly suffering and express divine truth through sacred imagery. The story of iconoclasm and its aftermath is far from a simple debate over images. It was a profound struggle over the very core of Christian faith. It represented a battle for the tangible presence of the incarnate God within the material world, for for the right of believers to access divine truth through visual means, and for the possibility of sanctifying everyday objects. This conflict encapsulates the tragic tension between spiritual devotion and worldly power, illustrating how well-meaning intentions, striving to protect the worship of God, can, when combined with absolute authority and fanaticism, lead to bloody conflicts and cultural devastation. It was a period marked by violence and repression, where the destruction of sacred images was driven by militant zeal, often causing irreparable harm to both religious communities and cultural heritage. However, this history also tells of extraordinary courage and resilience. Many believers, monks, and artists faced rulers' wrath and persecution, yet remained steadfast in their faith and artistic integrity, risking their lives for the preservation of what they considered divine truth. Through fire and suppression, the sacred images endured, emerging from the ordeal purified and strengthened. The icon, forged amid suffering, evolved into more than a symbol. It became the very heartbeat and soul of Orthodox spirituality. Its quiet, eternal glow continues to emanate from the depths of history, serving as a reminder of the enduring power of faith and the tragic yet heroic struggles that shaped it. The icon's journey through chaos and suffering transformed it into an object of divine mystery. More than mere art, it became a living testament to the divine presence among humanity. This complex and often tragic chapter in Byzantine history is not just about religious disputes over the depiction of saints and divine figures. It represents a fundamental confrontation over the nature of reality itself, the embrace of the incarnate God, the possibility of sanctifying matter, and the human right to behold the divine visually. It is a narrative marked by both tragedy and triumph, illustrating that even in the darkest times, the human spirit's desire for connection with the divine can lead to moments of profound renewal and artistic achievement. The icons that survived the storms of persecution stand today as silent witnesses, reminding us of a spiritual war fought not with swords, but with faith, conviction, and unwavering devotion. The story of iconoclasm, with its waves of destruction and resilience, is a testament to the enduring struggle for truth, beauty, and the sacred within the material world. It is a narrative of how misguided zeal, when driven by unchecked authority, can lead to devastating consequences, yet how steadfast belief and sacrifice can ultimately restore and elevate spiritual truth. The icons, reclaimed and revered, became symbols of divine revelation, embodiment of hope, and sources of spiritual strength. Their enduring light continues to shine through the ages, illuminating the path of countless believers and reminding us of the sacred drama that once unfolded, an epic struggle etched into the very fabric of Byzantine and Orthodox history. Thank you for dedicating your time to explore this complex and dramatic chapter of history. If you found this journey through one of the most turbulent and inspiring moments in Byzantine times engaging and enlightening, you may wish to continue exploring similar stories that reveal the profound depths of our cultural and spiritual past.